Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into data storytelling today, and I know you're all here to figure out how to move beyond just like basic data viz, right? And really make data sing. You know what I mean?
Make it come alive.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got some really awesome sources, and one thing that they make super clear is that data is obviously super powerful, but only when it's actually clear, concise, and it drives you to do something right. Like otherwise, it's just noise, just a bunch of numbers.
That's true. And a lot of people I find confuse data visualization with storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Like they think just having a pretty chart is enough.
Mm-hmm.
But having data without a narrative is kind of like having raw ingredients but no recipe.
Hmm.
You've got all this potential, but you don't know how to put it all together to get that delicious final result.
It's funny you should say that because I was thinking about that analogy too when I was reading through this stuff. Like it's ingredients, but you don't know what to do with them. In fact, one of our sources even defines data visualization as simply the visual representation of data. So, think tables, charts, graphs. They're great for like catching your eye, but that's just the very, very beginning.
Right? It's like the cover of the book. A good visualization will grab your attention,
Hmm.
but it needs that context. And it also needs a really clear purpose, even if you don't have like a full-blown story yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a strong visualization should spark curiosity and invite you to explore further.
Okay, so then how do we bridge that gap? How do we go from, just having a pretty picture
Hmm.
to a message that people really remember and that really sticks with them? That's where data storytelling comes in, right?
That's
Like
kind
that's the magic.
Yeah, data storytelling is all about refining the data
Hmm.
to craft a compelling narrative
Hmm.
that really resonates with your audience. Like taking those raw ingredients and using them to actually cook up a meal that really satisfies.
Yeah. And all of our sources actually suggest that there are like key questions that every data storyteller should be asking. So like what should the audience know? What should they actually do as a result of hearing this story, seeing this visualization, and how does the data support this goal? This is starting to feel like almost investigative journalism to me, like we're finding the story that's hidden within the data.
It is. It is like that. And one technique I find really helpful is trying to frame the data around like a central character
Mm,
or maybe even like a conflict,
yeah.
because this makes the information instantly relatable
Yeah.
and it makes it way more emotionally engaging for the audience. So for example, let's say you're presenting sales figures. Instead of just showing like a downward trend on a chart, you can actually tell the story of one particular salesperson who's struggling to adapt to like a changing market.
Mhm.
And suddenly the data has a human face and the stakes are higher.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good way to bring the data to life. So we've got the what with visualization, and we've got the why with storytelling. But how do we actually get there? How do we actually bridge those two? Well, our sources actually describe this process as being iterative. What does that even mean for someone who's like, just starting out and trying to tell a story with data for the first time?
Well, it means that it's not like a linear path. It's more like sculpting. You start with this big block of data and you gradually shape it into something meaningful. You're chipping away the excess, you're refining the contours, and you're constantly evaluating how the piece is coming together. So you might go back and forth between extracting insights from the data and then refining the visualizations a few times before you arrive at that final product.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not about getting it perfect on the first try. It's about embracing the messiness and being willing to revise and refine as you go. That actually makes me feel a lot better, but I imagine it's still super easy to get lost in the weeds. So how do we avoid that? How do we make sure our story stays focused and doesn't go off on a million different tangents?
I think one of the most important things is to be really ruthless with your data, just like a good editor would do with a manuscript. You have to really focus on the message and be willing to leave out data that doesn't support the core purpose. So it's really about clarity and conciseness, not about overwhelming the audience with too much information.
Yeah, totally. So we're looking for the signal and all the noise. But how do we know what to keep and what to cut? Like, are there any like rules of thumb or guidelines?
Well, one of our sources emphasizes this idea that all of the data, all the visualizations, and all of the messaging that you use has to support one common, identifiable, and meaningful goal. And this is where really understanding your audience comes in. Because a data story that totally resonates with a group of scientists might not work at all for like a group of marketing executives. So you need to speak their language and tailor the narrative to what they need and what they're interested in.
That makes sense. It's like choosing the right tool for the job. Like, you wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb. You have to pick the right approach based on who you're talking to and what you want them to understand. The source actually refers to these as communicators, like the different ways that we convey information.
Yes, exactly. They talk about visuals, the spoken word,
Yeah.
even like the inferences that you draw from the data.
Yeah.
It's all about choosing the right combination of tools to make sure the message is accurate, but also engaging. It's kind of like a chef selecting the right ingredients to get a specific flavor.
Ooh, I like that analogy. That reminds me of this one time where I was trying to explain this like super complicated statistical model to my grandmother, and I was using all this like technical jargon, and it went totally over her head. I realized I needed to simplify my language like way, way down and find a way to actually connect the data back to her own experiences. It's all about finding that sweet spot between being accurate but also making it accessible.
Exactly. You want to make sure you're being true to the data,
Yeah.
but also make sure it's understandable and engaging for people who maybe aren't data experts. Our sources really stress the importance of that iterative process, where you're refining the message and going back and forth between the data and your understanding of the audience. It's definitely a balancing act.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not just about like, just throwing the facts out there. It's about actually figuring out how to hook the audience emotionally, how to make them really care about what you're presenting. The sources talk about the importance of answering a few key questions, like what do you actually want your audience to know? What do you want them to do as a result of, hearing this story? And most importantly, how does your data support this desired action? It's kind of like a call to action, right?
It is. It's about moving beyond just presenting the information
Mm-hmm.
and actually trying to inspire some kind of action. It's the difference between saying, here's what the data shows,
Mm.
and here's why this data matters to you, and here's what we can all do about it. That's where the power of good data story comes in.
I love that. So data visualization is kind of like, shows us the picture. But data storytelling is what helps us understand the meaning behind it and actually inspires us to do something. I'm starting to see why our listener was so interested in this topic. It's about making data meaningful and impactful, not just like a bunch of random numbers on a screen.
Right, exactly. A good data story can bring data to life and make it relevant to people's lives. It can actually bridge the gap between information and action and help us make sense of the world and create change.
It's funny. A good data story kind of reminds me of like a good mystery novel. You don't just like reveal all the clues right away. You have to carefully pick and choose like which details you share and when to keep people on the edge of their seats and like, lead them towards a solution. It's about like building suspense and making the audience really want to find out what happens next.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison. And just like a good story, a data story needs that strong narrative arc. It needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you're introducing the characters, the setting, the conflict, and then finally the resolution. And through that whole journey, you're guiding the audience towards a deeper understanding of the data.
Yeah, and our sources don't really give us like a rigid step-by-step guide for creating that narrative, but they do make one thing clear. Every single data point that you include should actually serve the overall message. It's like you're a sculptor, chiseling away all the excess stone to reveal the booty underneath. You have to be really selective and purposeful with what you choose to include.
Absolutely. And that's where that iterative process that we talk about comes in again. You might start out with a hypothesis, explore the data for a bit, and then realize that you actually need to adjust your narrative based on what you found. So you have
Yeah.
to be really flexible and open to new insights as you go. Sometimes, the most interesting discoveries happen when you challenge those initial assumptions.
Totally. So it's a little bit like detective work, right? You're gathering clues, following leads, and then piecing together the story based on the evidence. And sometimes those clues take you down paths you didn't expect.
Exactly. Data storytelling is all about embracing that sense of discovery. It's about using data to explore, to learn, and to find those hidden truths. And I think some of the best data stories are the ones that challenge what we thought we knew and make us see the world in a totally different way.
I think we've covered a lot today. And it seems like what we've learned is that data visualization is like the appetizer, right? But data storytelling is the main course. It's all about turning those raw numbers into a compelling narrative that really resonates with your audience and makes people want to do something. It's about finding the story that's hidden within those numbers and then using it to, inform, persuade, and inspire.
And here's something to think about. Think about a time that you were just totally overwhelmed with data. How could having a clear narrative have made that information more useful to you? Maybe it would have helped you make a better decision or understand a really complex issue or even just feel less lost in a sea of information.
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. And remember, you don't have to be like a professional writer to tell a good data story. You just have to be curious, creative, and really dedicated to finding the meaning behind the numbers. So next time you're facing A mountain of data. Just remember the power of storytelling. Don't just show the numbers, tell the story behind them. Until next time, happy storytelling, everyone.